Hi, good afternoon, everyone at IMHX Connect. Hope you're enjoying the people day of this seminar. So my name's Stewart Jackson. I'm the sales manager at ATA Recruitment, and I've been asked to get involved today to talk a little bit about something from a recruitment perspective. We've been in the logistics, engineering, recruitment, supply chain for about a decade now, doing a lot of work in that marketplace, and excited to talk a bit about the idea I had, which was to talk about hiring the person and not the CV. So I've put down here a bit of an overview of kind of what I'm going to cover in the presentation, talking initially about why I chose this particular topic. And then due to how things are in the market at the minute, which I'll come back to, I'm going to talk a bit about what we define as recruitment policy and kind of some of the things I'll talk to a client about when they're trying to shape a recruitment policy when they're looking to hire an engineer, how you define it, how you build it, some of the models and the theories that we use behind that, and then some of the issues I see clients having when they're trying to define and execute a recruitment policy, and some of the best practices and ideals that I think make for effective recruitment when it comes to recruitment policy. So starting at the top then. So I came up with the idea of hire the person, not the CV, which was one of several different titles I'd thought of. For a few different reasons. So I'm sure if any of your businesses have been hiring, or if you've been a candidate in the marketplace, you've seen currently the job adverts and job demand are sky high. So currently adverts online are higher than pre-pandemic levels back in 2019. We measure all of our data as a business, and we found in Q2 versus Q1, we saw nearly a 50% uplift in client demand, and that happened incredibly quickly. So from what felt like the end of March to the start of April, saw an explosion of activity in the marketplace, which is seeing client demand incredibly high. And then marrying that up with the fact that the staff availability index has fallen very sharply in a similar space of time. Whole number of factors, some fairly commonly known: Brexit, some engineers leaving the country. Candidate confidence in the marketplace in looking for new roles is lower than usual, with perhaps some fears of job hunting still for those who are in secure roles who might usually be looking. All of these things have come together to form a very candidate-driven marketplace when it comes to recruitment. So I think at the minute, one of the key words I'm talking to clients about, and certainly talking to our consultants about, is compromise. I think if clients want to recruit successfully at the minute and maintain headcount growth and business growth, and compromise right now, possibly more than ever in my 15 years with the business, is really important for successful recruitment. So that's why I came up with this, the idea for this presentation. So I'm going to start at the top then and talk about ATA Recruitment, what we define recruitment policy as. It might mean different things to companies. Companies will have their own recruitment policies, but this is kind of when I was taught how to do recruitment by our business, it's how we see it. So your recruitment policy as a business fundamentally is there to define the hire that you want to make for a given role. That's the fundamental of your recruitment policy for a particular role. I think the thing sometimes that clients find difficult is how do you frame that selection criteria, which is what I'm going to talk about a bit more. So we, as a business, when we're taking a brief from a client, we have in our own minds what we define recruitment policy as for the client when we go to market and look for the engineering candidates for them. So we define recruitment policy into three key areas, which I'm going to go into now. So the three components for us when we're defining recruitment policy are, firstly, the aspirations and motivations of the individual for the role. So aspirations fairly evidently would be the aims, the goals, the aspiration, the longer term view you want the candidate to have when joining the business and taking the role. The motivation thing is a little bit more difficult. We're talking there about the key things you want the person to be stimulated by in taking that role. So because you really want the key drivers of that person's motivation to fit well with the content of the position and the offering for the role. So we always start with aspirations and motivations, looking more long term. The second thing we define recruitment policy as are the skills and the capabilities that someone needs to actually perform the role. So they technically might be a whole raft of hard skills, and also clearly a lot of communication and soft skills that fall within ability to do a role. And then finally, we use what we call the physical facts. That's a bit of an ATA-ism from a term, but those are the things that like the badges that clients put on requirements. They're kind of like the must-haves, and they're typically things like specific industrial experience, the number of years that someone's done a job for, specific qualifications that the client deems are essential, location the candidate needs to live in. All those things are what we call physical facts. They're more difficult to transfer from different sectors because they're physical requirements from a knowledge or a person or a location point of view that the client puts on their search. So that is what we define recruitment policy as when we take in the requirement from a client. So the next thing I want to talk about is the difference between experience and capability, because I think this is something when clients form or are forming recruitment policies in their own minds that isn't easy always to get right. So what's the difference then? So for me, and in how we do things, experience is how long someone spent doing something in a nutshell. So I've got 15 years and a bit experience in engineering recruitment, for example. That's the amount of time that I've been doing this for, a long time now. Capability is how effective someone is at that given activity. So when I'm talking to clients about their recruitment policy and what they're looking for, I see those things as very different to each other. The question for me, and the question I'll ask clients when they're giving me their briefs and what they need is, do they always go hand in hand? Do those two things have a linear relationship when it comes to someone's ability to actually perform a role? If you're a sports fan, I guess I think about a sporting analogy of, I don't know, would Cristiano Ronaldo have been a better footballer 2 years after his Premier League career than Robbie Savage, or more of a journeyman professional? You know, the amount of time you've done something for doesn't always mean you're better at it than someone's been doing it for a less of a period of time. Yeah. And I think one of the other biggest things that's difficult is how do you actually differentiate between the two? So I'll come back to that a bit later when it comes to actually building a recruitment policy. One of the other models I wanted to talk about in terms of how we view this when we're understanding the briefs from the client was the onion analogy. You may have seen a model like this or similar things online or in business studies that you've done. It talks about how people are formed of layers. So the onion analogy, when it comes to recruitment, we see it with 4 layers. So initially, right in the core of the person here, you've got their core values. So those are the things that are really innate to the person. They are part of their makeup. Your core values are typically formed in your formative years, probably up until your early adolescence, and they then become your aspirations, your political views in life, your level of integrity as an individual, your level of drive. They're things when you're hiring that are virtually impossible to change in the individual that you are hiring. You can't affect someone's core values typically that well because they are so ingrained in the person. So that's the center of someone's onion. We then move to the next level, which is abilities. Kind of maybe you can think about this a bit about someone's natural talent in a given area. They're very innate to the person. There tend to be natural abilities that person has got as a result of who they are. And then as we move further out into the onion, we look at the skills that the person has, and fundamentally the outer layer being the knowledge. So the model talks about the easiest areas to affect someone are the outer layers. So it's easier to teach knowledge than it is to affect someone's core values. It's easier to help someone become more skillful in a given discipline than it is to change their natural level of ability at something. So another model we're thinking about when it comes to recruitment policy. So when it comes to doing this, I'll always start off with the client in terms of defining the role. So clients should always, for me, start with why. So you've got to ask yourself, why you're hiring? What's the problem you've currently got? And what difference do you need this person to come in and make by actually joining the business? Yeah. Fast forward 6 or 12 months down the line, what should be different as to when you hire the person? Yeah, that's the definition of any recruitment for me to begin with. Always start with why. And then, moving on from that, you've then got to be thinking about how that person's going to impact, affect, and improve the situation the business is in relation to why they're hiring the role. Following on from that, once you've got those things in place, It's all about asking how are they going to make that happen and the actions that they're going to need to take. It's easy to put down a list of responsibilities of what the role does, but thinking more about what impact it's going to have and then asking yourself how the person can make that happen can quite often, for me, from a consulting point of view, provide much more detailed and much more developed conversations to get the client thinking. And following on from those points there, that the final thing then for me really is to then list out the responsibilities the person needs to have to take those actions. Yeah, and one of the other biggest things for any role in the business that you have to think about right at the start is how are you going to benchmark success? Not all roles are as easy to measure from a KPI point of view as others, but you have to have some idea of how you're going to measure whether someone's been effective, successful, and if they're progressing at the rate that you expect them to in the role. And I think one other thing, maybe when it comes to then moving on to the recruitment policy, is what things in that role could be taught or developed, by you as a business. Okay, so once we've understood the role, we're then beginning to talk about how do you build the recruitment policy for a role. So starting with the core values. So we're talking here more about the aspirations and motivations when it comes to the recruitment policy definition I talked about that we use at ATA earlier on. So I'll often start here when I'm talking to a client about what they need. My first question won't be, what qualifications do you need? My first question certainly wouldn't be, how many years experience? It'd be, okay, tell me about the person that you need. What kind of individual, what kind of character, what kind of attributes and traits are going to be needed to make the role a success? I always want my clients to be thinking more about this stuff first than some of the more technical aspects and the physical factors I referred to earlier that come later on when you're talking about recruitment policy. Also, businesses are all very different. So you have to think about a little bit the culture of the business the person's coming into. What personality type is going to fit into the team, is going to fit into the business? Is it a more managed culture? Is it a completely remote working culture? Do you need people that love freedom? Do you need people that like to be managed a bit more closely? All these things can make a big difference for the person fitting into the business and the role. And thinking long term again, you have to ask what kind of aspirations are going to be needed to fit with the vision for the role, the vision for the business. Are there needs for succession? What level of aspiration and progression do you want this person to have? You might not want that. You might want someone who's really happy in the role and he's going to do that role for 10 years. And that's on that basis, you want to find someone who's going to be satisfied doing that. So it's important to think about these things right at the beginning. So once we've got a really good understanding of the core values and the aspirations and the motivations you want from someone, it's then for me on to skills and abilities. So in terms of that, initially, I want to understand, my first question is, what do you need the person to be able to do? What do you need to be capable of on day one? It's a question that often clients find hard to answer. Clients find it easy to talk about the job duties, but if I ask a client, so what have they actually got to be able to do? It's a much harder question to answer because it gets you thinking about the actual actions and the skills that are required to make it happen. So if a client said to me, for example, I want someone to come in and transform the culture of my management team in the first 6 months. Okay, well, how do they do that? And again, these consultative type questions really get the client's brain ticking over and get them thinking about the actions, the skills, the capabilities that person's going to need to make the role a success. I also, clearly with it being engineering, do want to get an idea what technical skills are needed to do the role. These might be design skills. These might be the ability to produce specifications. It could be practical skills in stripping and rebuilding motors, whatever type of engineer it is we're looking at for a business. So always important for us to be understanding the technical skills. I also want to find out from a client and get them thinking early about what skills do they see as being transferable, because a lot are, and sometimes technical skills quite often are as well. So an early question to get the client thinking about maybe being a bit more open-minded later about the recruitment policy is how could they transfer skills in? And then as well as all the technical skills, we need to get a really clear idea of what kind of intangibles and soft skills is someone going to need to be able to fulfill the role. This could be the ability to sell. It could be the ability to influence others, negotiate, diplomacy. all these things that you're not going to be able to read about easily on a CV, but are really important for your recruitment partner to go and benchmark for you. So core values come first for me, then skills and abilities. And then finally, when I'm talking about what a client wants, I'm then into the physical facts and the knowledge. So first thing is, what knowledge does that person need to bring with them? So what's the essential knowledge, be it from a specific industry, specific technical standards, whatever it might be that someone will need to have to be able to perform the role. And then I need to move on and understand what qualifications are required. Sometimes, with some companies, there's an overarching recruitment policy where a company might take a blanket approach on some qualifications. So they might have a decision maker that might be more flexible in their own mind. But if they're working for a company that have got a broader approach, that maybe a level 3 or a degree type qualification is essential, sometimes those things are then passed on to us in terms of a physical fact for the recruitment policy. Clients then need to think about location. Clearly, with agile working being a big thing now, that could be a factor. It might be that you need someone within a certain proximity of the site because of the nature of the role. And then there are a whole list of other legal requirements that could be important. A practical role might be working at heights. A field-based role might need a clean driver's license. Some roles need DBS checks. Whatever it might be, those things are the final things then we look to understand about the person they're looking for. So all those things put together have built the recruitment policy. We've then got a clear idea of the individual, the key drivers, the motivations, the aspirations, the capabilities and the skills, and the technical knowledge and nous and paperwork sort of qualifications the person will need to make the role a success. So that's how you build a recruitment policy from ATA's point of view when you're thinking about going to market as an employer. What I see quite often, these are some of the issues I see clients falling into when doing this. So first and foremost is the selection process isn't then necessarily fit for purpose to benchmark what's been constructed from a recruitment policy point of view. So clearly you can see there we give a lot of thought to actually building that recruitment policy with a company. The thing after that is once you finish doing that, the client, obviously with their recruiter or on their own, needs to sit down and understand how are they going to benchmark the criteria in each area to see they've got the right person. And sometimes because recruitment needs to happen quickly, and sometimes because it's not necessarily thought as being not important, but perhaps just not being thought about, it's not then planned out for the selection process, and you end up with an interview process that doesn't actually benchmark what you need. I think the second biggest thing for me is when clients place more emphasis on experience rather than the person's capability. If I ask a client what they're looking for in the person, quite often I'll say one of the first answers I'll always get is 5 to 10 years experience. That's quite often one of the first things a client will say. Now, that may well be that person that you hire does need that level of perhaps experience because that means they've got then the capability that you need. But I'll often turn around to a client and ask them when they joined a team at some point in their career, how long it was before they felt they were more effective than the people sat around them. And quite often someone laughs when I ask that question because they'll feedback often that after a year of being with the business, maybe as an engineer, they felt more effective than other people that have been there 10 years. And I think it's when you ask those questions and get the person to think about it, it's really important to think capability rather than years experience. One of the biggest traps that clients fall into is lengthy lists of those physical facts that we talked about. Every time you put a physical fact on a recruitment policy and you say someone can only live half an hour away, or they have to have a degree, or they need to definitely come from the aerospace market, whatever it might be, you're just taking your talent pool of candidates and shrinking it and shrinking it and shrinking it until you're fishing from a small pond effectively, which makes your recruitment campaign more challenging. Another one would be best CV bias. So what I mean by this is if we produced a short list of candidates for a client, and let's say there's 3 or 4 CVs, there's one on paper that looks like the best candidate, and there's a couple that look promising, and maybe there's a bit of a wild card in there. Quite often, well, not quite often, certainly sometimes I'll find clients are that keen on the best looking CV, they can almost start to decide they're the right person actually before the interview process, and the interview process can become more of a confirmation of the CV, maybe rather than actually benchmarking some of the other things we talked about earlier, as to whether they're actually going to be the right fit for the role in the business, because that person might have the most experience. But I guess there's also those questions about retention and long term, and whether they've got the character traits and all those things. So quite often clients can get blinded by the best CV. I think when it comes to going to market and expectations, one of the current biggest pitfalls for sure is I think a lot of clients think the perfect fit candidate is available, and then it's more of a challenge to maybe educate or help clients understand that might not be the case. And I think with current conditions as they are, that's more of a challenge than it has been for a while. And I think the final thing would be thinking about core values last, and thinking about all this stuff first. It's really important. You're hiring people. You want people in your business that want to stick around. You want people that fit in with the people you've got, the core values and the person and all that stuff's so important. It always should be a priority for us. And this brings me on to my my sort of final few slides. So I have a term when I finish briefing with a client, and I'll say they're an attitude recruiter, and I love attitude recruiters. So I kind of took it as a bit of a moniker, that I'll speak to clients about why I think attitude recruiting is a good idea, where it can be the way that you proceed. So what attitude recruiting is building that recruitment policy starting with the core. So starting with the person, all that stuff we've talked about in detail earlier. You then define from a knowledge and skills point of view the essential, not preferred, but the essential criteria in those areas that someone needs to fulfill the role, right? And required, not desired, kind of a little bit of a cheesy tagline, but desirables are great, yeah, but essential requirements for me when you're doing this are where you should start your search. You then go to market with that brief. So all the things about the person you want and your base criteria technically and skill-wise for the right person, okay? And what that does, it allows you to absolutely maximize the amount of options you can consider for the role. And I think as an employer, the big upside for an employer is you're much more likely on that basis to actually attract candidates who are applying to the job for aspirational reasons, rather than potentially for the wrong reasons. So if you're hiring people that are joining your business and taking roles because they can see it as a career path and it's going to sort of hit their sweet spots from a motivation point of view, your ability to retain and develop those people just becomes infinitely easier. So I think it helps companies with their growth and long-term planning as well when they're hiring on that basis. Now, all that being said, if we or any recruitment company or business is working with can find the perfect candidate from a physical fact knowledge point of view who's also got this stuff, even better. Yeah, when we go to market, we'd always look for the broadest, but if we can see the right person who's also got all the right experience, even better. I think it's just important to understand with the candidate market as it is currently, that compromise and that being possible for every role is proven will be more difficult than normal. And then, so my final piece. So there's a lot of science that can help with your recruitment process. So I quite like the term gut feel assessment. I think it's an interesting point because gut feel, it's actually the decisions are made in your limbic brain. There's some quite interesting reading about that if you're interested in that sort of thing, because people talk about their gut feel assessment. So there's quite a few tools there you can use to sort of back up those gut feel assessments when it comes to attitude, character, and personality. We actually did a survey recently for some of our contacts, and it was quite interesting that nearly half had never used profiling tests in a selection process, which surprised me a little bit because quite a few of our clients, or quite a number do, but clearly quite a few still don't. So if you're not already using some of these profile tests, you've got some classic ones like Thomas International where you can do DISC profiling and high performance trait indicator markers, emotional intelligence testing, SHL, again, personality testing. We use that here sometimes for people's willingness to perform in a sales type role. You've got Myers-Briggs, which talks more about personality traits and profiles and the right sort of person for the role on that basis. And then you've got some slightly more free form ones like an AVA and activity vector analysis, which is another form of profiling test that you can use. So some of the things there that are worth thinking about if this is an area you've perhaps not had success in previously, or you'd like to add a little bit of science to your recruitment process. And that's everything I've got to say about recruitment policy. So that's why I think you should hire the person and not the CV. The market's interesting at the minute. It's challenging. Clients need to think more broadly about the options they're considering. Hopefully, how I've talked today about some of the ideas of what recruitment policy is, how you build an effective recruitment policy, having really first understood the content of the role that you're looking to fill, and then how you go about benchmarking against that recruitment policy might give some good food for thought, or hopefully some ideas to your own business's recruitment moving forwards. Thank you very much for your time.